Appreciate it, John. So, hello, how are you all doing? I hope you're having a great expo so far. If not, well, hopefully I will give you some things to talk to some people about so that we can improve upon that. So, my name is Garrett Seeley. I am an associate professor of biomedical equipment technology at Texas State Technical College in Waco, Texas. That is to say that, as I like to tell people, I help others learn to repair medical equipment. So what I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to talk about managing cyber attacks. Now, this is going to be different, hopefully, from the other presentations in the perspective that what I want to do is I want to give you and biomed technicians information so that you can actually talk to the people that you're going to contract for a lot of this maintenance. And I really want to help you all understand what you need to do to be up to speed, to be able to interface with them and to understand what you're up against. Because, wow, this has been an amazing and disturbing quarter from a perspective of cybersecurity. Ironically, all of those of us that are doing presentations in cybersecurity, we had put in our information to do this in July. So we had no idea what July, August, September, October would look like from a cybersecurity perspective. I don't know if you all have heard about it, but the ransomware attacks on hospitals was publicized to have been increased from September of this year to October of this year. This is just, 2 months ago to last month. We have seen an over 70% increase in cyber attacks towards hospitals using ransomware. That is a very disturbing curve. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what you can do about that and the steps that you would need to take to sort of secure your own cybersecurity program. So I really want to encourage you all to take out, I see a lot of y'all are taking out pieces of paper and pencils. Go ahead and just write down steps, and I'm going to just go through this. So I really want to focus on something that an in-house crew can use and just sort of give you a breakdown on this and talk about the best practices from an operational standpoint. I've gone ahead and I've done my intro. There's my whole splash screen, including title. When it comes to education, I do have a master's in IT. I do have a bachelor's in biomed. When it comes to certifications, I am a USMEOS Army grad. I'm one of the last of the Super Gs, if you know what that is. So when I joined up, they had gave me the old classification prior to all the changes that have been made in that program. So I've been in education for going on now almost 13 years. I was in the field prior to that, 12 years, 25 years experience doing this. So my employer, they do want me to plug this. If you have not heard of Texas State Technical College, we are a regional school in the state of Texas that we have up to 10 facilities, 10 locations where we train graduates system-wide, up to 50 of them a year, which makes us the largest graduator of biomed students in the nation. So, outside of the military. I should preface that. The military does like 400 students. They're fighting a huge attrition battle. And my contact information is on the bottom there if you'd like to contact me at some point in time. So I want to take you to the beginning when I became interested in cybersecurity. It was really in June, I think it was. October, it was June in 2017. And we had this problem with this WannaCry ransomware, and it had been on Forbes because they basically were able to infect a MedRat injector. For those of you that are familiar with that MedRat contrast media injector, what you're looking at is a WannaCry virus corruption of the operating system for that contrast media injector. And it was, that I'm aware of at least, the first time that we had ransomware really get national news for bringing down a medical device. And this was when the field really got interested in this And there's a lot of write-ups on that if you'd like to go back and take a look at that. But here's what we've been dealing with now. So this year, and in fact, actually, most of this stuff happened in the last quarter. Forbes reported at the beginning of August that we had our first death due to ransomware. What happened is there was a patient that was being routed to a hospital for breathing problems, if I'm not mistaken, and the hospital was already next to max capacity. Well, when their systems went down because of a ransomware attack, they had to go on paper backups, and everything just came to a grinding halt. And the incoming ambulance was diverted to a different hospital that was further away. Problem is, if a person's hypoxic, 3 minutes more travel can be the difference between life and death. And in this case, that was what happened. So we actually had our first death attributed to a ransomware attack. Ryuk, if you've heard of that, right? We've got a new ransomware. It's actually a ransomware technique more than it is an individual virus, which is scary because they're basically showing people this is how you can attack hospitals. It is a C2 type virus. That is, it is focusing on command and control, which means there's actually a live threat agent on the other side, which means you're up against an actual hacker who sent out a whole bunch of phishing stuff, waits for a bite on the line, and now you've got to fight somebody who actually does this. Sure, you take pictures, it's fantastic, you're welcome to. However, I will say that you should be able to download and watch this later on. So all of this will be hopefully posted to the web for you all. PHI, I don't know if you're aware of this, now has a street value because you can change credit card information. You can even change Social Security, though it's very difficult. But you can't really change your medical record. If you think about it, we're trying to preserve these medical records for a minimum of 10 years, ideally in perpetuity, right? That means the record doesn't change. That means the information in this is solid and now has street value for people that are trying to attack others. So there's a lot of attacks that we have to watch for. We have to watch for two general things. There's the indirect and direct attacks. Indirect is where I'm just sort of sending things out and trying to get you to bite on it. We call that phishing, right? Phishing with a PH, not with an F, right? And then the direct attack, where I'm actually trying to either pry my way into your network or I'm trying to bring your network down. And there's various reasons for that. It can be from a profiteering perspective, or it can be from a revenge perspective, and somebody just wants to do something just because they can. Does that make sense? So these are the types of people that we're going to have to watch against. Now, one of the big things that we struggle with is that bottom line, is we have to do this and defend against all this stuff, and we can't really get around the HIPAA rules, right? So you have to protect the PHI, but you can't change it. You see what I'm saying? And so it's a real barrier of constraint that we're going to be working with. So here's how I see this whole defensive approach being. We're going to have to work with IT. We're going to have to work with our the ODM. And we're going to have to work with risk management. And really, when it comes to mine, we've got the Three Stooges. That's pretty much how you feel about this, isn't it? So which one do you think you are, Larry Moore or Curly? Right? And we have to battle professionals, which means that we're really outdone. But that's okay, because you are a member of a team. You are not an individual that has to tackle these. You are a member of a team. And so that's the best way to approach this, is when you start seeing yourself as a member of that team, then you're working with the OEM, working with your IT, and you're working with risk management. And I'm sure a lot of y'all are sitting there thinking, this is what my manager says all the time to do anyway, right? Is work with the team. And so that's okay, that's good. Let's take what we know works in biomed and apply that to this. So we're going to have to work with the OEM people. We're going to have to ask them some hard questions to see what we can do to defend ourselves against a cyber attack. The best way to do that is to do the things that I've itemized here. And we'll go through all of these things. Yeah, go ahead, picture, get in the way. But these are definitely your checklist of things to talk to the OEM about. Okay? So when you're talking to your OEM team, let's go ahead and we'll go through this. And forgive me if I'm going fast, but I don't want to have to run over. I've got like 40 slides to go through, so it's going to take some time. Okay, patches. Yes, you need the stinking patches. In fact, actually, let me put it to you this way. You're allowed to patch things. You are. The FDA is not going to get upset if you do something like update a virus scanner or if you apply a patch. However, you do want to talk to your OEM before doing this. Okay? There is a certain degree of if you patched it, you bought it. So there is something called sandboxing. Have any of you heard of sandboxing? Take something, pull it off your network, put it off to the side, right? Back it up. I don't know if you all understand how to back things up, but if they have a hard drive, you can remove the hard drive and take an image of that hard drive using a program called CloneZilla. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah, if you're not doing this, you need to do this. I'll say that again. CloneZilla. You can remove a hard drive. You can copy that hard drive and make an image of it. Worst case scenario, you take that hard drive after you've messed everything up. You put it back into this cloner. You clone it back to the way it was before, and you've essentially lost nothing. Does that make sense? Big problem with patches is they can often interrupt the ability of software to work because they do change fundamentally some things in the systems. That being said, there are things you need to patch immediately. There is something out there called the zero logon bug. If you are running a Windows Server class operating system, it may be vulnerable. If you are running that system in any form of Active Directory, you are vulnerable. Okay? So you do have to really patch this thing, and you need to patch this thing immediately. This is so critical. The United States military actually was telling people pull servers offline and patch this or keep them offline. That's bad, right? It is the main tip of the spear, as I've heard it called, for the Ryuk ransomware attack. So if you're able to patch that, you can remove the tip of the spear. Doesn't mean they don't have the stick to still beat you with, but they've got one less weapon. Does that make sense? So you can do these patches. I really want you to see that as something that you want to do. Now, I hope you have disabled automatic updates on stuff, because if you haven't disabled automatic updates, what will happen is you'll have, say, for example, a imaging security guidance, or not, imaging guidance system for your surgery. I'm getting tongue-tied. Hold on, let me take a drink of water. Anyway, what this device would do is it would load CT images and use that to guide, say, for example, neurosurgeries. Those things, in my experience, have been running on Windows. Well, imagine how much fun that would be for the surgeon to all of a sudden get in the middle of surgery. You have to shut down for an immediate update. No, that's not acceptable, right? So make sure that you've disabled automatic updates and control when these machines do updates. But you do need these updates, folks, you do. Okay, so other things to ask about. This is something you need to ask your OEM. There is something out there, Flash Java. ASP is, used to have it right off the top of my head, what it meant. But these are platformless operating systems that would work in your browser, and they have access to your entire system. I think that's an easy way to explain it. The problem with that is there was very little security built into these things. So these were older exploits. Well, we might run things that have to run on Flash or have to run on ASP. If you don't have to do it, get to a HTML version 5.2 on your updates. If you can, ask about these things. Ask your OEM, do I really need these things up and running? These are glaring security holes because they had access to the whole system. Moving along, disabling front-facing USB ports. How many of y'all do this? Show of hands, anyone? Just a couple in the room. Y'all, Andrew, you might have been in Dallas when this happened. We had a CT machine that was getting infected because the rad tech was charging their phone on the front of it. Okay? But that rad tech liked doing things that were borderline questionable on the personal time. You know, they can do whatever they want to do. But they took their phone and they left it rooted. The phone was running Android. Android is a Linux machine. Guess what that CT machine was? Linux. Every virus that worked on that phone also worked on that CT machine. When they hooked their phone up to the USB, it networked to that machine automatically. Just try to send things. Folks, you just have to expect this to be an issue. Give people wall chargers. Wall chargers don't connect to a dang thing, right? They're just power cords. Yes, sir.
So RIT basically managed what USB devices can be plugged into the PCs, but in the central monitoring station, like each station, we build USB ports and on power outlets that are hidden.
Yeah. So you've already experienced this problem. Is that people bring their phones to work, and even if they're not on their phones, they try to charge their phones. It's almost been a courtesy or a necessity that we do for our workers, right? But the problem with this is those phones present a vulnerability because they're exposed to a lot of different networks. And then everyone brings those into work, and then they connect them up to it. And then you've got, that's just the workers. Imagine your patients, right? I was talking to a networking professional just the other day. He was telling me that they walked into a room and saw a patient with their phone plugged up to the monitor, charging it. Because the monitor had a service USB port on the back that was live. Seriously, disable these ports. Unless you need these ports on, figure out a way to turn them off. And ask the question, right? A lot of this is just learning the questions to ask your OEM. So other things you need to do, network discovery. Windows basically will reach out and try and talk to things. It's not as bad as Mac. Mac is like, ooh, another Mac. I get to talk. Hey, friend, how are you? And Mac is extremely aggressive in trying to talk to other Macs. Windows, not so much, but the nature of being open and starting to network with each other and starting to share things, well, that's all in the network discovery portions. So now you know to look at network discovery to see what your settings are on that machine. Is that machine just open, right? And I'm going to ask, put it in your ballpark to ask the OEM, what settings do I really need, right? There is another thing that you can learn about called GPO. This is what I use in my labs to keep my students out of the command line. They don't like me. My coworkers don't like me. They, in fact, go into my computers and go, why did you disable command prompt? How do I get around that? You don't. You use my login to get into the maintenance of it, and then you re-enable the command line access. Now you can actually do this. You can actually set which users have access to which properties in Windows, which utilities in Windows. It's called GPO. I'm not going to go through all the settings. It's literally a book, 2.5, 3 inches thick, right? But you can ask about it and see if this is an option. Okay, limiting VPN access. This is something that you need to do, but it's not going to make you popular with your OEMs. In fact, they're not going to like you in this. How many of you have a VPN to access your hospital by remote? Should be every hand in the room, right? How many of you have a policy for purging old logins from your VPN? What is your policy for that? Do you really need to keep an old login for a guy that used to maintain your sterilizer for the next 5 years? I mean, that is, you don't know where that person is. They had access to your network at one point in time. Do you know if they're even still employed at that company? Do you see what I'm saying? What is your policy for verifying your external access for these OEMs? If the answer is I don't know, then this was worth it. You now know to go home and start asking that question, right? You like that one, Andrew? This, by the way, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, if you do this one wrong, you will piss off the OEM people. They need to have access. I'm not saying deny them access. I'm asking you, what is your policy for making sure that when they experience their natural turnover, you are adapting your login? Does that make sense? Sure.
So I think your organization does time limit.
Okay.
So vendor has to remove.
Okay.
So that's kind of I think how our department those external consistent.
Yeah, that would be a good. That's a good answer to what I just asked. Let me go ahead and restate that for people that are listening online. So the question was basically, is it okay to have a time limit set to a login where it automatically would disable, say, 6 months, every 6 months, and then every 6 months you simply send an email to that address to see if that person's still active at that company? That's ideal. That is exactly what I'm talking about. You have a policy and you're even alert to the policy. Great. That is the goal. Sir, you had another question?
You just have the concept, same employee 90-day policy. You haven't logged in 90 days.
Okay. Good. So you have a policy, you're alert to the policy, you know what's going on. Again, that my goal would be that I got a whole room full of people that know that answer to that question. Do you see what I'm saying? If you do not know the answer to that question, you need to get an answer to that question. Okay, so moving along, tracking. If you have something that is off-site, how do you track what operating system is on it and where it is? And this is more of a question from a CMMS perspective, but I want to warn you this. If you have garbage in your inventory from a CMMS perspective, the people you contract to do your security support will not be able to accurately tell you what machine is where. Does that make sense? So you have got to get that one locked down. And in general, I know we've got a lot of people that have done management, you know, that are doing these classes. And I'm sort of thinking either most of you are either, you know, Tech 2, Tech 3 or managers. So you've dealt with this problem. This problem will exacerbate your security issues. So this becomes even more of a concern now, right? Please address where you're at. And in general, there is something out there if you want to look into it called a zero trust policy. You can look into that, and that would be something that you might want to adapt if it's applicable to you. Okay, so you know this is something. Well, Edgar, I think you and I 10 years ago had discussions on this very subject. You know, BioMins need to get more active on capital management and purchasing. We need to be more active agents inside the hospital. And one of the things we need to look at is a concept between embedded security or bolt-on security. Now, what I got here is arguably two takes, right? One of them was designed with security as the concept, right? from the beginning. The other one obviously was not designed as security was the original concept. It was just adapted as needed. It might look cool from a steampunk perspective. It's not functional for us. So is security, when you're buying things, is the concept of security from the OEM's perspective embedded in the system, or are they add-ons? And folks, I'm going to tell you this. If the answer is, well, that's extra, it's an add-on. Just going to say that one right off. So let's move on. Next thing I want you to do is, I don't want you to just always focus on the OEM side, how you interact with the OEM. Let's talk about how you can interact with your own hospital's IT portion, okay? And over, we hear as BioMeds, IT is part of the team and we need to all play together. And we've all heard this mantra for what, 10, 15 years now, right? Well, let's talk about how IT is structured. When I started looking at IT as a biomed, I realized there's something that's really a problem. When biomeds are, in their own little silo, it's usually accidental. We have our own radiology team, we have our own lab team, we have a guy that does sterilizers, we have a guy that does vents and anesthesia, right? These were the people that sort of specialized on that, didn't intend to make it to where a person could sit there and go, well, I only work on imaging, so I'm not going to help you in lab, right? And we tend to look at that person and go, no, you sort of work for this hospital, so get your butt up there, I need help, right? IT does exactly the opposite. IT compartmentalizes on purpose because they are scared that one person would have all the keys to the kingdom. They have that little trust of each other. That's inside their own operation. So you might have a team where you have a web designer and they're deliberately kept in the dark as to how the IT networking side works. You are going to have to break through this. This is going to fly in the face of that zero trust policy that IT is used to. Does that make sense? So right off, know that when it comes to IT and biomed integration, we've got some just some fundamental differences in opinion of operation. Maybe now it makes sense as to why your customers call you for IT problems and not IT for IT problems, right? Things we have to go apart. So learn the structure, learn where they're compartmentalized. That's going to be to your advantage. Okay, so there are some things we can do in-house. If you are not aware of these things, you need to be aware of these things. These are the things that you need to do in order to make sure that your own house, this is not OEM, this is the equipment that you capital purchases, right? These are equipments that are owned by your hospital. Do you know the operating systems of all of your equipment? Do you know the versions? Has anyone ever done systems integration in here? Anyone ever had to marry all of your systems to like Epic and then you realize that you bought one model of pump, but got 5 different versions of one model of pump, right? Do you know what all those versions are? Do you know the operating system they're running? Could we list that in our CMMS, right? How about this one? Do you have a way to organize all of your logins? There's something used in IT as Active Directory. I like Active Directory. It works really well, but it's not something that is generally applied to medical devices. Just understand that they have a system where a server is controlling who logs on to what machine and where, right? But get to know this. Get to know what this thing is capable of. We talked about limiting VPN access. That is a hard question, right? What I'd like to focus on next is networking design. You need to learn how your hospital is built from a networking standpoint. And there are these 4 things that I think are really going to help you out. And we're going to cover those next. So we'll talk about VLANing. We'll talk about how we do access control. We'll talk about IPSs, the intrusion prevention systems, and how they integrate into your switches. And I really want to put you all into a situation where you can go out of this education and go talk to the people that are doing the consulting that are in the show today, right? I want you all taking some of this information, asking them some questions about it, because hopefully this will allow you to interface with them a little better. Okay, so let's talk about the things that they're capable of doing. First off, I will tell you this. This is what scares me. Does anyone know what that is? That is a Raspberry Pi. Great. What is a Raspberry Pi, though? It is, he said, a microcomputer. So can this thing run Windows? Actually, yes, it can now. We can run a stripped down embedded version of Windows. We can put this thing on just about anything, because you know what it costs? Or less. You said 50 bucks. Honestly, or less. At 50 bucks, isn't it affordable for things like your the person that made all of your blanket warming cabinets to put each one of these on there and then report back to the web real time as to what each one of those cabinets are measuring? This is called the Internet of Medical Things, IoMT. We are seeing this. Folks, they're putting computers. This is not just a piece of electronic. This is not just an electronic controller. This is a full-blown computer. It's got USB, it's got video built onto it, it's got a networking port on it. I love the picture because you can see how big it is. That is a full computer. Yeah, built-in Wi-Fi is something that it has as well. We are going to see more and more modules like this integrated on simple things like blanket warmers that we never thought of. Here's the problem. That is a device on a network that you now have to track the version on. You now have to verify its vulnerabilities. You now have to patch it. that blooming bed or blanket warmer just became so much more complicated, didn't it? Way more complicated than the thermistor and the heating element. And so this is the future. No, this isn't the future. This is 2 years ago. Okay. Moving along with logins. I know we've got a lot of logins. I'm not here to do a lot of security settings, but I do want to give you 2 things to think about. If you ever do get certifications, they're going to ask you about these 2 concepts. There's a concept of authentication versus authorization. Authentication is I am who I say I am. Authorization is I am only allowed to do these things. Please understand those things. When it comes to authentication, I like to say, it's something you have, it's something you are, it's something you know. So you have a badge, right? You know a password. Well, then you are who you say you are. Or you have a badge and you are your fingerprint on a biometric scanner. So you are who you say you are. Do you see what I'm saying? And so it's one of those 3 things. I'll say those 3 things again. Something you have, something you are, or something you know. Keeping it as simple as I can. Now, keep in mind, just because you are who you say you are does not mean you are authorized to do things. And this is how your IT perceives things. I really want you to have accounts without having standardized passwords. Folks, if you go with default passwords on anything, understand that if they're posted on the web, anyone who wants to hack you also has access to that information, right? So coupling that with the previous slide, now you've got to go through the blanket warmer and figure out its default passwords and change them, right? I wouldn't think a blanket warmer would have a default password. It does. Okay, so here we go. We've talked about security already. I might have gotten a little bit ahead of myself. When you're doing passwords, I will tell you this. Use camel case. You'll notice I've got that up in the first front line right there. What I've done here is we've replaced certain vowels with certain letters, right? Or numbers and things like that. Vowel is a letter, is not. Okay. We replace certain vowels with certain symbols or numbers, right? There's no spaces, but in order to indicate a new word, I've made things to where they've got a cap instead of a lowercase character. So your password, instead of becoming a password, more has a concept of a passphrase, right? Not just a word, but a whole sentence. And then notice I got the bottom here. I talk about the fob, the password, the biometric scanner, something you have, something you know, something you are. Sandboxing, we talked about this briefly. Take things that you're going to update, pull them off your network, put them off to the side, do whatever update you would like to do after you backed it up, of course. And if it messes things up, you can always roll back. Basics of verifying that things are going to be working. It's also a good practice to get into because now you're actually taking images of things that you know are functional and you're copying them to another hard drive. Okay, IP segmentation. This graphic, I think, is very important. You'll notice that any of those brick walls, those are what I'm trying to do to represent a firewall, the concept of a firewall. A firewall looks at the traffic and decides whether the traffic should go through or not. That's an easy way to explain it. The way that it does it is all the traffic works on things, not just IP, but a thing called a port. A port is the easiest way for me to explain how IT works is I give you an IP. An IP is like a street address, right? But what if you get to that street address and it's not a house? It's an apartment building. Well, how do I get to the individual? Well, I have to know the apartment number, right? IPs are just like that, where the address is getting to the building, but the port is getting to the individual apartment. And we only have singles here. We don't double up. We don't have more than one person living in one place. One software, one port, okay? But there are 65,000 ports on a machine. That's a hard limit. So here's what we're going to deal with. When you talk past that firewall, the firewall says, okay, well, is this communication allowed or not? Is this port something I'm going to let fly? And I'm not going to go terribly deep into this. This isn't a IT course so much as a management approach, right? But I need you to spend some time learning the basics of segmentation. Notice that I've got my network monitor behind a firewall separate from my lab so that my network can't talk to the lab unless it's told to do so by that firewall. And that's sort of a basic of how ITs are structured. So spend a little bit of time learning how your IT works. I need you to understand this concept, probably most importantly, out of any of the networking stuff, and that is a concept of VLANing. Now, VLANing at first was just this simple. All I wanted to do is take and replace the number of switches and make it to where there are less switches in the overall network. We weren't using all of the ports on the switch. So what we ended up doing is just basically finding a way to do half the switch for this one task and the other half of the switch for this other task. What it has become is the ability for me to quickly segment my network like the previous slide. So we've gotten a little bit more adaptive now. And when we want to section somebody off behind their own firewall, we can actually do that electronically and very quickly. So let me give you this example now that we've covered all that information. A person has a phone. The phone is rooted for the purpose of whatever they want to do in their personal life. They come into work. They somehow put that phone on a network where your infusion device is, right? You got a pump. The pump is networked, right? Pumps are networked heavily nowadays, aren't they? Drug libraries and all that other stuff. So check this out. That phone sees that pump, infects that pump. That pump starts doing weird things. And what do I mean by weird things? It starts squawking to the internet. Now, the person who wrote this virus is smart. And they said, you know, if I mask it as internet traffic, no one will see it as unusual. But wait, in the next few slides, we'll talk about our systems that actually look for behavior and evaluate, hey, this IP, that belongs to a pump. That pump, that doesn't need to run a web browser. Why is that pump talking to a website? You see what I'm saying? So let's say your system is smart enough to make that decision, and it sits there and goes, huh, well, that's unusual. It creates a new VLAN, and it moves the device over into that VLAN. Folks, we have the ability to adaptively change these VLANs. This is one of the most important concepts you need to understand about these people that are working security over there in the main conference hall. Most of their systems, this is exactly how they defend you. They see what's going on, right? By the way, what a blessing is it that you didn't have to come up with this, right? You just have to find a vendor that you want to work with that might help you. But your hospital should have a vendor they're working with that will help them. But their systems will look at the behavior and go, huh, that's weird behavior. I want to move it over to its own VLAN. I'm going to transfer that device to its own VLAN. It's behind a firewall. It's not exposed to anyone else. What does it look like to you? Pump just lost access to the drug library. Your nurse's call, right? You need to understand that something simple like that could be this change in your network. So then you have to talk to the people that you've contracted to do this work to make that decision and see why. So understand that this is how their systems work. Okay, so access control lists are basically going to be a part of that. That is how their systems are going to work. This device can do these ports to these devices. And it's just that simple. Let me say that again. This device can talk on this port to these machines. Okay? It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. I see a lot of nodding heads here. I know it's high humidity, high heat in the room. Forgive me for if I'm not as active as I need to be here, but folks, let's just say, I need you to wake up on this one. I need you to follow. You ready? This device can talk on this port to this device. And it's just that simple. Don't make it more complicated. Sound good? Couple that with the VLAN. Hey, that device isn't necessarily talking to the machine I told it was talking to, and it jumped ports. Well, that's unusual, right? And so then we know that that adaptive VLAN stuff has to come into place. And the device that's doing it is what's called this. It's an intrusion prevention system. Now, there is intrusion detection. Intrusion detection is good. There's nothing wrong with an alarm going, hey, this is unusual activity. But wouldn't it be nice if you found the unusual activity to actually do something about it? It'd be like if you had a red light and everyone just keeps driving through a red light and there's a cop standing on the corner going, yeah, I know, man, I wish I could do something about it. But you're a cop. How about you do something about it, right? With an intrusion prevention system, it can do something about it. It sees the bad behavior because of the ACL list, right? It knows this infusion device is squawking to somebody it shouldn't be talking to. It puts it on a VLAN until it can figure out what's going on so that it's isolated from the other machines on your network. Should be the first thing it does, should happen as quick as that. right? And this is basically what these companies are going to do. It's going to work with something called Cisco ICE. And Cisco ICE is going to be able to see what's going on. And the Cisco switches in general allow for this adaptive change. So that's basically what we're doing, and that's basically how the whole thing works. Yes, it's embedded in the switches, but I will tell you this: the intrusion prevention system is a system that's off to the side. It's looking at all the traffic that the switches are forwarding back and forth, right? And then when it sees something it doesn't like, then it does the remote. I'm going to remote into that switch, and I'm going to make these changes for you. You see what I'm saying? Pretty good system, right? Yes, sir. Yeah.
Working yesterday.
Yes.
I think I don't know that these devices.
Okay, so we're back to the previous slide. What he said for those of you that are watching online is he said he's having some site problems where IT is making changes to the ACLs and it's triggering policies, you know, to be implemented, and it's doing this segmentation and isolating devices that don't necessarily need to be isolated, right? And the whole network's coming to a crash. First off, I will tell you, what if they found something bad? There is a possibility they may have found something bad and we just didn't know about it, right? So right off the impression is, well, maybe IT's limiting what we're doing. Man, you can't do that. Actually, no, it's sort of okay, let's go into detective mode, as biomeds often do. Did they actually see something bad? And the question is, the answer is yes, they did see something bad. We'll know that we, well, how am I doing? Fine, by the way. We'll know that they're, you know, they're trying to do something to help us, right? If they didn't see something that was bad, then, you know, we gotta talk to them like you were suggesting before, you know, of look, you're too compartmentalized, you didn't see the big picture on this one, right? Remember, you're sort of fighting that compartmentalization at that point in time. That they've got a good idea for security, but we're not communicating that idea for security all the way out. Seriously, how am I doing that? 326. Wow, we're almost to the end. So I want to make sure that I can go through this as quickly as I can. As far as the cloud applications are concerned, the only thing I'll talk about with cloud is we're using more and more. We're using stuff like Epic, right? Putting things on cloud, and we need cloud access. So keep in mind that VLANing and that segmenting sometimes mess with that. It can also mess with things like, you know, as I mentioned earlier, access to drug libraries, access to your patient monitoring servers, things like that are just, let's just say that we're going to see more and more stuff moving to the cloud. And I could probably move on to the next slide after that. Okay, so I really want to recommend that you all take this information that I told you about, you know, using the VLANs, the ACLs, and the intrusion and prevention systems, and use that information to ask questions of the people that are in the show today. I was looking for Metagate. I didn't see them the other day, but I did see the rest of them. They should be there. So ask them questions. See what they say about their ability to detect intrusions and help your hospitals out. Folks, I will tell you this. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. This is sort of like getting a contractor for your CT machine. This is something that we do all the time, right? But it also does not absolve us of the responsibility of understanding this stuff, because we still have to be able to be the agent in that hospital that's going to help in this situation, because these people are remote, right? So I do want to cover a real quick preparation of cybersecurity, and that is that you do want to go ahead and follow these best practices. And you know what? When I'm looking at this slide, I'm thinking, let's just go ahead and move on, because I want to go ahead and make sure that we're through this and go to your next presentation. Okay, so during a hack, I'm going to tell you this. Most of the time, you all will be hacked and you won't even know it. In fact, actually, I've been told that the average lag time between detection of we've been hacked and the hack event itself is 180 days, a half a year. So the possibility of you actually seeing an active event is probably low. I'll be honest, most hackers, if they're going to hit your hospital, they're going to do it after hours. 3 in the morning, best time to do it. The most junior staff in the hospital is online and all of the IT people and biomeds are asleep. Right? Sure. And that's a good thing that can be done with the ACL as well. His suggestion was, you know, when you do get into those after hours situations, just go ahead and scale down the network accessibility to certain ports because you know you're not going to need them. For example, you know half your lab's going to shut down, right? Why do we need to leave access to the half that's shut down on? It's a good question to ask, right? Okay, so during the hack, things that I would recommend that you do, you want to isolate a machine and you want to disable or look at the outgoing traffic. Understand that disabling is probably the best thing, but the only problem with that is if you actually do truly unplug a threat, now evaluating it has just become more difficult, right? Paper redundancy, you should still have paper redundancy at your facility, right? So sure, some of you all have had to go on that. So there's nothing wrong with, especially at 3 in the morning, let's spend an hour going on paper redundancy if that's what's needed, right? And then of course you've got to activate the team. The thing that really scares me is that 180-degree lag. Sorry, 180 degree, that's something from my electronics. 180-day lag. I am rushing through this, bear with me. Okay, so after attacks, what are your obligations? And this is very important for you to understand. I want to stress, and this is almost like the risk management people at this point in time, don't talk outside of your organization, right? That's oops 101 right there, right? Every one of y'all are managers. I'm sure you've said that to your team. If you even have a patient incident, don't talk about it. That's a HIPAA thing, right? So, but it does bear to say, or does do well for us to say. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with hiring a consultant and doing penetration testing. In fact, actually, I got a CMS off to the side. They're actually going to expect you to do stuff like that. And I think in the next slide, I've got a hospital that actually got fined for not doing that adequately. Let's go on to the next thing. Of course, you know you've got to get a hold of your risk management. That's risk management handles the outside communications and press and all that other stuff. You do have to do outside communications, however. There is something called the OCR, Office of Civil Rights. Does anyone know about these people? Show of hands. Okay, here's the deal. They are actually requiring that you get a hold of them within 60 days of discovery of an event. So much like a patient event, right? You're going to have to handle a hack in similar approaches. Here's the scary part. You ready? Your states will also have a Department of Health that wants to be noticed within 60 days of the event. And I'm sorry, 60 days of the discovery of the event, not the event itself, but your discovery of the event, right? You also do have to let the customers, the patients that were involved, know by mail. Also, depending upon the severity of this event or what's going on, you may have to let local law enforcement know. I will tell you this, something to take back to the hospitals. It's better to over-report than under-report. And here's why. CHS was just fined by OCR for under evaluated events. So this is one of those C-suite water cooler style conversations that's probably happening in your hospital already. Your upper management is probably already very concerned with the concept of they didn't follow through adequately and there's fines given out. Okay? So my suggestion, work with your team in that situation. Internally, communicate, right? Externally, let your risk management team handle that, but try and assist as much as you can if anyone needs information, because understand that you have an obligation as a facility to report this, okay? And who to report it to is actually in this slide right here as a link, okay? Past data, I can go through this. I think that the best thing that I can tell you is that we're increasing approximately 50% of the tax each year, about a 50% increase as a general rule of thumb, and that was pre-COVID. So after the COVID pandemic hit, a lot of people that were bored easily and had a lot of knowledge as to how to bring things down went home, sat on their hands for a little bit. But after sitting on their hands for a little bit, said, okay, I'm bored. I don't know, let's just hack a hospital. Why not? Right? We have seen a tremendous increase, a 71% increase in ransomwares from September of this year to October of this year. And it's November. We don't have November's data. Yes, sir.
So two parts. So in these attacks, is this organized crime? Is this government? Both? And why are our federal agencies not carrying out the cause of brutality?
No, this is good. This is good. A good question. The question was, who is it that's the threat agents that are attacking hospitals? Is it? You had several parts to that. First question was something of, is it foreign governments that are attacking us? Yes, there were 4 people that were recently named as conspirators in attacks on the United States healthcare systems, specifically in 2017, and they were all 4 Russian government employees. Okay? Second, you asked if there is organized crime that is attacking our hospitals. Yes, there is organized crime attacking our hospitals because PHI has street value. In fact, actually, most recently, there was a crime syndicate that got published because they listed 400 hospitals that they said were ripe for the picking. All right? And while I'm going to even one up you, you ready? Is it individuals doing it? Yes, it is individuals doing it. And there are 2 reasons that I find. Number 1, they're bored and they like the challenge. Number 2, they have an axe to grind and they're going after somebody. Which is why you can't just sit there and have a VPN access to somebody who potentially was fired, right? And not have a policy for purging that. Folks, is the sky falling? No. I want you to see yourself as the participant on the front line of this thing. That being said, is it getting worse? Yeah. You need help. And I'm not saying that professionally. Maybe I am saying that professionally, but I mean, you need help from a perspective of tackling this beast. You need to get coordinated with all of the people that you are working with. And you need to start either learning or evaluating using this presentation on your hospital. Now, I think that's a good way for me to end it. Remember, this is all about minimizing risk, and we're good at it. Okay? Does anyone have any other questions? I know I went a little long, but thank you for listening. No? Fantastic. I think there is some form of feedback here somewhere. If there isn't a feedback, I guess I'll see you later. If there is, please fill that out and leave that with the people at the desk. And thank you for listening to me pontificate for like an hour solid on one subject of security.